Our belief in pacifism is based on the fact that there's a spark of the divine in every person. And under no circumstances should we take the life of another person. When the United States passed their Universal Military Training Act of 1948, it was important to make a statement against militarism.
The Fairhope Four, I call them. These 4 young guys refused to register.
We were sentenced to a year and a day in prison.
They didn't want to draft into the army, and they got sent to jail for a while.
Because they didn't want war.
And then the judge said to them that if you don't want to be part of this, then you can leave the country.
What they had to do is a really hard choice, leaving your country to a place you've never been.
Our prison sentences terminated on October 27th, 1950. So November 4th, we got into our vehicles and started for Costa Rica.
I'm gonna lay down my heavy load down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the river. I'm gonna lay down my heavy load way down by the riverside. Study war no more. I ain't gonna study a war no more. Ain't gonna study a war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more.
Maybe it was presumptuous of us, but we just had this feeling inside of us, this is what we must do.
This group of Quakers leaving the United States for conscientious reasons.
I don't think I'd ever heard of Costa Rica.
I didn't really know where Costa Rica was or ever hear of it before.
I guess we just foolhardy or otherwise, there we were, just burning our bridges.
It all happened so fast.
Costa Rica, they don't have a standing army, it's not a militaristic society.
So that rung a bell in our minds as well.
Let's go create a new vision.
Going out of the country to live somewhere and be pioneers, that sounds pretty exciting when you're young.
Starting all over again, that sounds like it'd be interesting.
What is it like to call Monteverde home?
It's a place where you're comfortable, a place where there's a lot of nature, it's not any danger.
We're in the middle of a forest, so that's very calming. You can just go outside, climb a tree or something.
Monteverde is really a special sacred place of amazing, beautiful nature that is rare and not many people get to see.
What makes Monteverde special is all the nature and all the trees and all the animals.
It was the idea of being able to raise your children where they wouldn't be in that military atmosphere.
If your country is military, it's pretty hard to be patriotic in that line. And you just have to stand for the moral standards that you believe in. and feel like that if you were a good citizen, that you were being patriotic. Being a good citizen doesn't necessarily mean going to war.
The Quaker response is if war is the power and the systems of domination, of violence, of oppression are the power, and you know they're wrong, then you have an obligation, no matter what the results, to speak truth to that. That's an old Quaker phrase, speak truth to power.
Pacifism was never something I doubted. No, to think of going out and killing any human being was the stupidest thing ever, you know? It just didn't make sense.
So we refused to register.
I know that the guys definitely just felt like they really could not justifiably cooperate with a draft that was requiring people to go and fight and kill.
The peace testimony of friends was talked about in all our gatherings and so forth.
The peace testimony is a way of being an activist for peace. It's not being a pacifist. It's not even pacifism, as most Quakers would refer to it. It's examining our own lives to see whether the seeds of war lie in our own lifestyles, to examine my actions, my life, and that of broader society, of our government, of the world, to see whether the occasion for war, the seeds of war, are sown in our acquisitiveness, our aggression, our use of resources, the way we treat the environment. And the peace testimony needs to address that activism. How do we actively choose to use our lives and our efforts and our resources to remove the occasion of war?
For Quakers, it is very natural to have those acts of conscience. Or for me, it's very natural to think about Costa Rica not having an army. It was officially decided that the expense that you would have in armies and training people and having military academics, that would be invested into other social important needs such as education, agriculture, and so on.
There's a monument at the University for Peace here in San Jose of two huge hands that are opening up for a dove to fly away from them. And in that monument, one of the plaques that are there says, "Blessed is the Costa Rican mother who knows at birth that her child will never grow to be a soldier."
Costa Rica, most of it, they never were a big war. We don't have an army.
We don't have to worry about getting drafted to the army and maybe going to another place and having the danger of dying.
So for me, that's home, a place where you feel safe.
Free? Free from war?
The plan to move out of the U.S. and move to Costa Rica was all incubated in Alabama.
Well, Fairhope, Alabama is not the typical southern town. Fairhope had a lot of little off the normal road of thinking among its members, with the School of Organic Education and the Friends Meeting and the Single Tax Corporation.
Fairhope had a bit of a northerner streak in them. I don't know how else to put it. A lot of people from Iowa had come down there to settle, so it hardly seemed like a southern town in a way.
My great-uncles started moving down about 1910. And so various friends and relatives started moving down, not only from Iowa, but some also from Ohio. As the number of Quakers' friends increased in Fairhope, they finally had enough so that they founded the Fairhope Monthly Meeting of Friends in 1919. I was born in Fairhope in 1922. My father had a farm about 2 miles east of the center of Fairhope, and he had some cows too for milk.
My grandparents had gone to Fairhope for winters from Iowa. That's when I met Hubert, was when we were down there visiting my grandparents one Christmas vacation, and that's where it all began for the two of us. Well, it was a dairy farm, so there we were milking cows twice a day. Hubert was very well thought of. He had this milk route. He delivered house to house. Everybody really liked him and thought well of him, and the Mendenhall family and the Quaker community in general. We had the two daughters at that time, and then along came Philip in 1948. And then there was Eston. He was from Iowa, and there were a bunch of Iowa young fellows. He was one of them, and he served some time in prison.
Eston was my husband. I came down to Monteverde as one of the original group. I was 18 at the time. Eston was 20. We'd been married 5 months. Well, we'd met at boarding school in Ohio. I was a good friend of Lucky's, and Eston was a good friend of Wolf's.
We were all at Friends boarding school together at Olney. Mary was my best friend there too, so we'd known each other since we were 15. Wolf and I were planning on getting married in October 1950. I was in Iowa, and he was in Alabama.
We and Hubert's sisters and his brother-in-law were all involved with the young people there at Fairhope, and there was quite a group. There were the fellows who hadn't registered, Wolf and the Rockwell boys.
The first time I was called up for the Second World War, the Army assigned me to the Medical Corps. And I was assigned to the ward where there were 16 soldiers who had spinal injuries and were paralyzed from the waist down. Total waste of lives. And then I was assigned to a ship as a medical personnel. We headed for Europe, to Bremen, Germany. Going up the river to Bremen, I saw the total destruction that war causes. And in Bremen, just blocks and blocks of rubble. And so when it came to the time to register for the 1948 draft, I decided that I would just not have any part of it. There was a lot of discussion about the trend in the United States toward more militarism and the fact that everything was in some way contributing toward the military, you might say. Income tax, a large part of it goes direct to the military.
I think the popular misconception is that the U.S. spent all this money during World War II and then kind of came back and converted and went back to making automobiles instead of weapons. And that might have been true for a short period, but when the Cold War takes hold, the military budget grows tremendously. So one of the recommendations of the new National Security Council in 1950 is that the U.S. has to have a huge military budget and that it has to be sold to the public as a positive thing. And I won't call it defense. People like to say it goes towards defense. It's not defense, it's the militarized economy.
The judge, when he sentenced us, said that he understood why we were taking this stand, but he said that he had to abide by the law. And the law said that if a person refused to register, he had to give a penalty. And so he sentenced us to a year and a day in prison. We were sent to a minimum security prison in Tallahassee, Florida. We were actually in prison for 4 months and a day, then released on parole. Other inmates thought we were just totally stupid to be in prison for something we didn't really have to be in prison for.
And in the meantime, when Hubert was milking the cows, on the radio from New Orleans station, he heard this advertisement for a tour, an international house agricultural tour.
Hubert and Mildred Mendenhall decided to go on this tour of farmers to visit all the countries of Central America.
We didn't know any Spanish, and how it was a good way to find out about that part of the world. So we signed up for that. Marvin came to the rescue. Marvin was paroled to us. He was out of prison for non-registration, and he was paroled to Hubert on the dairy farm. So we were all set up to leave things with him. And on we went to Costa Rica. We fell in love with Costa Rica and got to the airport all ready to leave, say goodbye forever to Costa Rica. Got on the plane. Pretty soon we got off again because the plane wasn't going to go. Something wrong with it. So I was thinking in my mind, is this some kind of an omen? Hubert and I felt like this is it. We're going to work towards selling out and going, taking our family to Costa Rica. And of course, Hubert's parents were going to go where he did.
And then the word started spreading amongst other Quakers.
Then everybody wanted to go there, all his cousins, everybody. Well, that didn't exactly work out. It wasn't that simple.
It just sort of grew. It was rather exciting, and everybody, a lot of movement going on there.
Word of mouth from those who knew.
First was the Birmingham News, and then the other papers picked up on it, and then Time magazine showed up.
Time magazine sent a reporter down and did quite a little article, which was published in Time magazine in October of 1950.
They put a picture in their magazine. This is the local paper and the Fairhope courier letters that people wrote to the local newspaper saying what they thought. We send you our greetings and love with the prayer that you may mean to that country what friends first coming here meant to America. Some really interesting correspondence. A lot of people that said, good on you, and a lot of people would like to go too. And
there would definitely be neighbors that would not be approving and would not be very happy with their stand, their pacifist stand. They felt like they were failing their country, they were being unpatriotic.
You're walking out on things. Why don't you stay here and fight militarism? We need you here. But eventually, like I say, amongst the letters are some from those very influential Quakers, too, who said, well, this is what these people want to do, they better do it.
So it was not unhappy in any sense of the word. And when we loaded up and started out, it was an adventure.
And by the end of the year, we were on our way.
My sister Dorothy and her husband and family got this 1948 Chevrolet 1.5-ton truck. My brother Cecil had a Jeep, and he thought that it'd be awful nice to have that Jeep in Costa Rica. We left Fairhope, Alabama on November 4th. 2 or 3 days later, arrived at the border between the United States and Mexico at Laredo. My cousin, David Rockwell, thought he knew a little bit of Spanish. He asked the boy at this tourist camp, ¿Cómo se llama usted? The boy answered, Kenyo. So for the rest of the time they were there, they called him Kenyo. What he actually said was, who, me? We didn't know Spanish. On the trip down, we kind of wondered sometimes just whether we had done the right thing, but no, things are going along pretty good. We went to Mexico City to get transit visas and found that Mexico had their part of the Pan American Highway built to the Guatemala border. Guatemala didn't have anything connecting with it. So, well, now, how are we going to get all of this stuff into Guatemala? All they had was a narrow gauge railroad. We had to drive down to put the vehicles on flat cars, and it was pretty rickety and not very nice, but got us there. Those of us that came by land finally got the vehicles to San Jose on February 4th, 1951, 3 months to the day since we'd left Fairhope. Most of the people came down by air.
We flew down from New Orleans along with Eston and Mary Rockwell.
What I would remember the most was when we landed in Guatemala City and spent the night there on the way down. And that was pretty exotic. The guys bought us each an orchid and pinned it on our blouses. When we got down here, it was a little difficult because nobody knew where we were going to settle.
We didn't know where we were going to locate, so we didn't know what kind of farming we were going to do. But we figured that we'll have a farming community somewhere. And Costa Rica was very happy to have us come and gave us immigrant visas.
It was very different from anything in the States. It was just all this, how do you behave? You don't understand anything anybody's saying, and it's just really difficult to know how to feel or what to think.
There was some publicity about this group of Quakers descending upon the country. So people were coming to us to offer to sell us land.
The guys went out, sometimes a woman went with them, would go out and check any place in the country that sounded like it might be a possible place to settle. There was one point when the community was just about to split up because some of us thought it would be really neat to live down the San Isidro area on a farm that we'd looked at there. And Fairhope people decided it was too warm. They decided they would rather stand up for settling in a higher altitude where it'd be a little cooler. And so we kept looking, and finally, a German man who had talked to the people in the group was flying over this area. I saw that It had been cleared, and grass was growing, and there was some land that was usable for pastures, certainly. And so he checked it out to see who owned it and whether we could get the titles from them.
A man brought 3 of the group by jeep to Guatemala, and then from there up by horseback.
Because there was no road, and there was a trail that could possibly take an ox cart could go over, but it was not very nice, and lots of big rock and stuff.
And that was on April 19th, 1951.
And they came back and they said, there's no question, we found the right place.
This was an area settled by a small amount of Costa Rican farmers that were here.
Some of the families moved quite a little ways away, and others bought land close by and stayed as neighbors.
And they became good friends and helped us in many ways.
We made a deal for a tract of land of about 3,400 acres and set aside about 1/3 of it when we came up to be left in forest as a watershed at the headwaters of our little river.
It was pretty harrowing to get up and down that road back at that time. And some trips were made entirely on horseback. It was impossible to get a Land Rover Jeep up the road.
So then we went to work with picks and shovels on the ox cart trail and fixed the worst parts of it, brought the first Jeeps up.
There was a lot of mud to deal with.
We had some hills that were named Ball Bearing Hill and all kinds of things. And you can imagine that the winches on the front of the vehicles pulled out an awful lot of posts and so on coming up.
Then we had to decide, what are we going to name our community? One suggestion was Buena Vista. Another suggestion, Monteverde, Green Mountain. Monteverde sounds better. So we named our friends community Monteverde. Then we started moving up.
There were some houses already here that the Costa Ricans had made with their split shingle roofs. It was, roughly done, but they were houses. And so some people lived in those houses, and some of us had already bought Army surplus tents.
Well, we were ready to take on about anything. We'd been living in an upstairs apartment with 3 young children in San Jose for 5 months. So the adventure of going to live in a tent, we didn't imagine we were going to live in a tent for as long as we did, but that was okay too. Our daughter was born in the tent, our 3rd daughter. Life was great. Those days in that tent were, really look back on those with pleasure.
In the Quaker religion, there are very strong core values of simplicity, equality, peace, justice, family, community. In Costa Rican culture, their values are peace, family, community, very closely related. And they mesh together very well.
Here was a gringo community, basically transplanted North Americans here in the middle of Costa Rica, starting their own sort of pioneer community, English speaking for the most part, having square dances every other Saturday night, having community group dinners and so forth, in this matrix of Costa Rica, Spanish speaking, Central American culture.
Y ahí, cuando yo conocí a estas personas ahí en Monteverde, yo me imaginaba que seguro eran muy grandes y muy gordos. Don Arturo Roque, cuando me dio la mano, que me apretó muy duro, muy fuerte, era costumbre de él. Y yo le agarré también la mano. La religión ha tenido que ver en todas las cosas del mundo. Sí, porque ya verdaderamente, si uno tiene religión es porque cree en un ser que maneja todo y hay que vivir correctamente. Y entonces, sí, cuando yo conocí a estos Quakers, tenía una chispita, vamos, de lo que podía encontrar yo en ellos.
At that point, Catholicism was definitely what there was in the country, and there weren't very many other churches. And so we were certainly looked on with suspicion, I think, as somebody that might proselytize, and we don't do that. We feel the value of teaching by the way you live.
So these were two cultures that basically were settled up on this mountaintop that was pretty isolated. It was a dirt road to come in and out with torrential rains, which we get all year long, and 3 to 4 meters of precipitation a year.
My husband had been a square dancer back at Fairhope and had gone to square dances. So he thought, well, that's something we could do here that wouldn't take any extra equipment or anything to do. I played the harmonica and he called. We did it every 2 weeks then, and people loved it, and a lot of Costa Ricans even came, and some of them joined in, and some of them helped make music. Anything that we had, social gatherings, they would come to, because I think they were as curious about us as we were about them, and oftentimes would come and just visit. But since they couldn't speak English, and most of us didn't speak Spanish, a smile is a universal language. There was ways of communicating other than languages at that point.
In the early days, and when we first moved up here, we had to decide what we were going to do. Well, it was dairy. Dairy was definitely a given.
We decided that cheese would be our principal product. So we bought 40 or 50 purebred Guernsey heifer calves from herds in the Central Valley of Costa Rica and brought them up in a few at a time in the backs of the Jeeps. And when these calves grew up and were ready to start producing milk, we built a little factory building, and we bought a 200-gallon cheese vat made in Wisconsin and had it shipped down. It was quite a job to get up that mountain. The first cheese was produced in April of 1954. And the first week's production was about 350 pounds.
You had basically this Quaker group creating the cheese factory with the Costa Rican families that were here. But at the same time, you had the Costa Rican farmers that were teaching the Quakers about chayote and yucca or tequisque and all of these other root crops that were up here, and how to basically convert their diets and farming skills into what matched the environment here.
There were gardens on a lot of the farms that we got, and immediately we planted more gardens, of course.
Yes, we had a garden as soon as we could get one going.
There were potatoes and tomatoes and beans. I planted coffee and bananas. Our food was rather monotonous. Chayotes were rather plentiful. The chayote grows on a vine. They're a very staple food and easily grown. So we had boiled chayotes, fried chayotes, chayote pickles, chayote pie. The food value is not that great, but it's filling.
Oh, you have something else up there in your sleeve. In the very beginning of Monteverde, there was always Friday afternoon Scrabble, always.
Dictionary.
And I think that's about when Scrabble first came out, too, so it was a new game.
24, 25, 29.
I loved the games. I played it with Dorothy, Marvin's sister, oldest sister. That went on for years to this very day. Every Friday afternoon, Scrabble.
22, 26, 30.
Wow, nice going.
I feel a strong sense of connection with the story of the original group that came down here, their choices and their courage in making pretty dramatic changes in their lives for the sake of conscience, to follow as best they could discern it, what they were called to do.
Costa Rica was very proud of the fact that they had more teachers than soldiers when we moved here. That was sort of a phrase that was used, the fact that they put their money into education rather than military.
Demilitarization is well and deeply established in the Costa Rican popular soul. It is part of our national being. We are proud of that.
People speak of Costa Rica as a pacifist nation, and there not being an army here. I know that was an incentive, an attractive thing for the Quaker settlers who came here in the 50s. But I also am very conscious that with living here comes an awareness that not having an army it's a powerful step, but it's not the equivalent of being a pacifist country. This is a place where there's plenty of violence, although it is a culture that has a wonderful emphasis on friendliness and hospitality and harmony and some of the conflict avoidance that goes with that.
It is true that Costa Rica being demilitarized, it's not necessarily a pacifistic country. And it is a source of concern that even when we have this seemingly strong and definitive adherence to demilitarization, we do not have an equivalent in the way we relate to each other. And that is something that we need to deal with. And the only way to do that, I think, is in the context of a nation and a government that takes care of the common good and upholds social justice, education, and the access to health and other services as one of its most important national goals.
Living in community and living in this kind of environment it's a wonderful thing, but we all struggle with our tensions and imperfections and it's an ever-changing landscape.
There were times when there was a difficulty and there were things that happened where there were disagreements and families did not agree with each other.
Well, people are people, and a bunch of people trying to get along under these circumstances. Sometimes there was some kind of tricky stuff to get worked through. We did have the Friends School, So that was a big plus.
Hubert's sister Mary was a teacher at this school in Fairhope, and she continued right on down here.
There were some who felt like we should be making use of the local school, the Costa Rican school, the government school, rather than having our own Quaker school.
We were thinking of becoming more integrated into the Costa Rican community and becoming more Costa Rican. And our first 3 children all went to the little Cerro Plano 2-grade school for the first 2 years. The Quakers in the group did not approve of our move, of what we were doing.
But worked through it, and those that wanted to go take part in government school went ahead and did so, and it was okay.
What we were was a community of individualists, and you get a community of individuals together, you gotta learn to work on a lot of issues that come up. It's not always easy.
I mean, we were a headstrong bunch of people. One reason we were down there.
When the first Quakers came here, they were not conservationists.
I think they were naturally conserving areas the same way with Costa Rican farmers who naturally conserve forest fragments. I think that, again, that was another value that mixed in with the 2 cultures. And so the Quakers set aside 500 acres as a protection of their water source.
Wolf Winden, he was one of the original Quakers here. And Wolf himself became one of the most ardent conservationists. But in the early days, he was the guy who sold chainsaws.
When we came here, our farm was all in trees, so he had to cut trees to make pasture. So I often say he spent the first 20 years cutting trees, and the next 20 years only went on to be more than that, like 60 years, saving trees.
There was a research scientist that came here named George Powell, who worked really closely with Wolf Winden. They became very good friends.
George Powell, who was a biologist, that was an ornithologist studying here, he and his wife lived on our farm here and were good friends with us. And it was George and Harriet that became concerned about having a reserve.
And George and Wolf partnered up to start protecting that area, starting with the original 500 acres and expanding it slowly but surely to get to its current size. That was the start of the Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve. And George nor Wolf maintained ownership of this. They found a Costa Rican organization called the Tropical Science Center, Centro Científico Tropical, and they have had ownership of this reserve, and it was one of the first private reserves in the tropics.
That's when conservation really kind of sparked and took flame here. It's been a transformation of the community that originated here, who had no real drive towards conservation, to becoming one of the most central models of conservation that exists really around the world.
Well, definitely the ecotourism piece was not anything in anybody's plan.
Nobody ever dreamed this would become a tourist place, that people would be coming from all over the world. We were just farmers. We had farms.
After the reserve was created, tourists started coming up. So you started out with having researchers come in, and then bird watchers come in, and then tourists who really wanted to see the resplendent quetzal or the three-wattled bellbird or monkeys or tapir, all of these different animals. You've got all of a sudden this door open in the tropics where people are bilingual and where people are open to, you can come here and you can stay, and I'll help you. Wolf Gwyndon took how many researchers? Through the woods, clearing trails for them and paths and making sure that they didn't get lost. It went from this farming community where everybody was working together on the farms, and if the road washed out, everybody was showing up to do that, to then people not knowing quite what to do. And many of in the Quaker community are thinking, oh my goodness, now what? The classic question of George Powell and Wolf Gwyndon, did we do a good thing or a bad thing? There's a middle generation in here that really struggled with who they were and what they were doing. And now I see the next generation kind of has grown up in this environment, economic environment as well as the natural environment. Ecotourism serves a very important role in generating income in a really positive way that is supposed to work in harmony with nature. But if you don't have the foresight and the vision and the planning, ooh, it's a rough road. And so a group of 27 people got together and said, basically, we're not going to stop this change that's going on, but let's form an organization that can help guide it, and guide it in a way that's beneficial for the community as well as the people that were coming here. And so they created the Monteverde Institute with the hope of attracting students here so that they could be learning all about conservation, cloud forests, tropical ecology. And that started with one course that came out of the University System of California called Education Abroad that continues to this day.
I first came to Monteverde as a graduate student, and I realized as soon as I got here that the community, the people community here, was really a fantastic and very compelling part of this place.
Quakers have traditionally valued peace and justice, and that has been our public witness in the world. That's what we're known for. I see the environmental crises that we're facing as not separate from that, but as completely intertwined with peace and justice issues.
Recently we had the climate march here, which I'm really passionate about.
We now had the biggest climate march in Costa Rica.
Una, dos, tres.
It really taught me how to, in a smart and peaceful way, stand up for what you believe in and what you think is right.
I think Costa Rica is already doing a lot to try and combat climate change compared to other places, but there's still a lot we could be doing. We can already see the rainy seasons are becoming shorter periods and more like intense rain rather than it spread out, and the dry seasons are becoming drier and there's less cloud cover. And so, as climate change progresses, it's gonna get worse and worse.
I think that it's never gonna be enough unless everybody starts acting.
We need to focus on the earth and where we live, because if we don't and we're just focusing on all of that material stuff, we're not going to have an earth to live on.
Being in the school, they have taught me a lot of Quaker values, like how to treat people with respect, and I think that that's very important for any human being at all. And I think that it really has impacted my life and how I treat others and how I try to teach others to treat others too.
I feel a real congruence with those values as they still live in the community, and my desire to be true to that process of discernment and leading. It's really made me think about what does it mean to have an impact in the world, I know that there's tension between living one's life in a quiet day-to-day way in accordance with one's values and going out and engaging with the world in a broader scale. The power of the model of living one's life perhaps deserves more credit than I was giving it in terms of its impact on the world and the ripples that go out from it. You start to see that the Quakers here have had a powerful influence on the dynamics of how people in the zone engage with each other, engage with the world around them, and people who come through all the time are influenced by their experience here.
You can build community wherever you are, but it means you have to know your neighbors. You can do that if you have the motivation. I feel that what I've learned from living in Monteverde myself was that each one of us can do much more than we think we can do.
If you look at movements historically, they mostly come from people having some hope of an alternative, that there's something else possible or some other vision that they can share with people.
I don't think there was ever a time that we even questioned whether it would be viable and lasting. We just figured it would and lived accordingly.
It's hard work. There's no question there.
I see my world, my life, my work as constantly being on this, walking this line between despair and hope. And I see despair in some of the political things that are going on and the climate change that I see right now going on in Monteverde. And I can get to a point where I am feeling so full of despair that I say, well, what's the point of any of this? For me, that's the dance, that's the tightrope walk that I think I and many others are desperately trying to sort of figure out. And I think Monteverde is a really great microcosm to watch that because we're seeing the effects of climate change. And yet we're also seeing people who are taking action, who are doing things on the ground in a small scale. But they also have visions of how can this grow? How can this be a model for others?
Find hope even in really dark times, because that's the way we build movements and make a difference.
You do what you can do to provide hope for yourself and others, and it's an avoidance of complete despair in which you roll up on your belly and say that I couldn't change the big thing, so I chose to do nothing.
All of these years later, what we have is a place basically on the planet that is dedicated to conservation, that is dedicated to community, that is dedicated to peace and social justice.
We all need to be open to learning and to working with others, to looking at the heart of everybody and not just looking at the outside, to look at the heart. And if we could all do that more, I think, what would this whole world be like?
Shines bright tonight for you. You're sleeping out in the dark. Well, hold tight, the night is bright. Hope the stars beam guiding light for you. is long. Another day, open arms for you. Well, step up and don't be late. Your luck and love are called to fate. Just remember the sky's wide open for you.